Hi, thank you so much for coming to the contributors reading for this issue of the Southampton Review. We're utterly thrilled to have gotten to the end of it and have it out. Whoops. I have one announcement before I make more announcements. The teen poetry documentary screening, Louder Than a Bomb, today from 4:15 to 6 has been moved to room 201 in Chancellor's Hall. So there, did my duty. So this issue, we had such a good time putting together. A new associate editor came on board, Susan Scarf Merrill. And she was of a tremendous help, which, phew. And the one time I turned to her and said, gee, I'm thinking about doing a 10K run on Shelter Island. And this was in the middle of closing, and she looked at me horrified and said, you can't. I said, why not? And she said, what if you fall down and get hurt? It'll never get done. Luckily I didn't fall down. So this afternoon we have some wonderful readers for you from this issue, and we're delighted to bring this to you. And of course we hope that you will also come this evening to the 5-year celebration of TSR. We'll be having a number of wonderful people reading, including somebody right here in the audience. Professor Rosenblatt, and Professor Sheehan will be here reading too. So as well as many others, it'll be a surprise to you later on. But first of all, I'd like for you all to welcome Kaylie Jones.
It's an honor to be here. So this, I didn't know what to do because I didn't know how to break this novel into a little part that would be good for this issue, but I finally figured out that the beginning is always the best place to start. So this is the first chapter of a novel I'm working on, and I'm not going to start at the very beginning because I don't want to take up too much time, but all you really need to know is that I want this to be an unreliable narrator, and she's not purposefully dishonest, but just simply doesn't have all the facts, or at least is not willing to look at all the facts. So this is just a couple of pages from the Anger Meridian. I'm halfway through my ice cream bar, feet propped on the balcony railing, thinking how lucky I am to be free of financial and emotional insecurity and to have a husband who only wants the best for me. Every day except Sunday, I go to the elegant Waft Spa in nearby Oak Lawn and practice 2 hours of Ashtanga or Bikram yoga, and if I have the time before Tenny gets home from the Brooks Academy for the gifted, talented, and highly motivated, I can have a massage or a facial or a swim. Bo likes me to dress up and look my very best at events such as the Petroleum Club Ball or his new charity fundraiser, Bootstraps for Dallas, a nonprofit organization that gives free commercial space to local startup companies. It's companies with great new ideas. Bo's nonprofit also raises money to supply building materials in war-torn Middle Eastern countries, which is a wonderful thing. Last fall, the president of the Dallas Chamber of Commerce and the mayor came to the fundraiser at the Jewel, and everybody said, we made quite the stunning couple, and I know the doorbell sounds. Several insistent pulses. It's 3:21 a.m. by my Rolex, my birthday gift from Bo. This is late, even for him. He's probably had too many cocktails with his client from Saudi Arabia, and can't find his keys. He's a sweet and tender drunk, vulnerable, wrapping his big arms around me and telling me how much he loves me, which is nice because he's not a big talker and he doesn't talk about his feelings. In the hall, I passed the sepia-toned photograph of the self-satisfied Lieutenant Huntley, who fought so bravely under the command of General G.T. Beauregard during the taking of Fort Sumter, and I opened the door. Before me stand two big, hulking uniformed policemen, one tall, muscular and black, the other tall, muscular and white. Mrs. Huntley? I nod in stupefaction. Maybe he's been arrested for drunk driving. Oh God, what a mess this will make, but I'll be there for him, a steadfast ally in his time of need. I must be presentable. What am I wearing? The silk ashes and roses nightgown and robe from Saks, my Christmas gift from Bo, chosen by his executive's assistant, Janine, who has excellent taste. I am still holding a quarter of the ice cream bar in my right hand, so I pull the robe closed over my chest with my left. They introduce themselves. They wear dark blue short-sleeve uniforms that expose their threatening forearms, and they have the same Texas accent as our now terrifying former president, which somehow manages to sound authoritarian and stupid at once. The policemen's eyes seem already old and hard in their flat, smooth, unlined faces. I want to cry out, "I didn't do it!" The white one, whose name is Johnston, takes the initiative and steps forward. "Mrs. Huntley," he says gravely, "your husband's been in a car accident." I continue to nod, waiting for him to tell me what hospital Beau's in, imagining Beau sitting in an emergency room with a cast on his arm. He'll be annoyed if he can't play golf. Slowly, the policeman utters, "Mrs. Huntley, I think you better sit down." We move into the dining room, and I perch myself expectantly on the armrest of the couch. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, Mrs. Huntley, but he didn't make it." My mouth falls open, but no words come. I wonder how many times in their young lives they've had to do this. The ice cream drips onto my lap, and I place the melting bar in a marble ashtray on the coffee table. My next thought, incongruous and insane, is Mom won't be able to blame me for this. It makes me wonder for a moment if I'm losing my mind, and I shudder. "He hit a tree head-on," says the other policeman, Officer Bales. "He probably didn't feel a thing." "Oh, you poor man," I say, standing and placing my left hand on the young Officer Bales' arm for a moment. I realize my hand is shaking. "What a terrible job you have." He reaches out to take my elbow and guides me back to the couch and sits me down, as if concerned that my knees might buckle beneath me. The two of them remain standing, which forces me to crane my neck to see their faces. Officer Johnston shifts in his lace-up boots as if he's standing barefoot on hot sand. "You may as well know this right now because you're going to find it out soon. There was a girl in the car." Tenny. I jump to my feet, obviously not thinking this through, because 9-year-old Tenny's been asleep in her bed since 9 o'clock, tucked in safely by me. "Please sit down, Mrs. Huntley," insists Officer Johnston. Officer Bales reaches into his pocket and pulls out a little notebook and reads, "Lucretia Smalls. Do you know this person? How can this be? Just last weekend we were at the Blue Bayou, a restaurant and jazz club uptown where Lucretia is a waitress. Beau and his partner Bucky, the Buckingham in Buckingham and Huntley, LLC, they love her name. And they've added it to the list of African-American names that they've been collecting to make fun of. Most of them come from their alma mater's football team, the Gamecocks. They have Pierre, Antoine, Napoleon. This kind of talk makes me very nervous and uncomfortable, and Beau knows this. But he's already had a few cocktails, and he probably forgot. Martha Buckingham sat there smiling while they ran through their list of names as if they were discussing her son's little league batting average. Lucretia came back to our table with our order, and they greeted her warmly. As she sauntered off, I said, "African-American names often have roots in African languages." They all turned toward me, smiling expectantly, though slightly perturbed, since in general I'm not a big conversationalist. I went right on. Kisa in Uganda means born after twins. Kizia means lighthearted in Nigeria. I know for sure that Lulu means pearl in Swahili. Any of these could have been the roots of her name. I could see the telltale signs. I could see that telltale jaw muscle pulsing in Beau's wide, grown-up man's face, and knew that he was irritated. Later on the way home, he told me that it would be best if I kept comments like that to myself from now on. And I gently reminded him that this kind of talk about African-American names is not good for me. I don't like it. And he makes me uneasy. And he smiled tightly and patted my knee. Lucretia's a waitress at the Blue Bayou, I tell the officer. I've always been a good girl who does her homework and aims to please. What is it, I ask nervously. What? Tell me. The young policemen are glancing knowingly at each other. Well, Officer Johnston sighs deeply, without getting graphic. She was killed too. Mr. Huntley's, his pants were down, Officer Bales adds, then shakes his head. The woman was under the steering wheel. It's going to be hard to explain. You mean like in the world according to Garp? They stare at me, dumbfounded. Thank you.
And now A. Robert Towbin will be reading A Business Trip to California.
business trip to California. It was a new way to help the environment and make money. It might easily become another Silicon Valley triumph or pass into obscurity. The 42-year-old millionaire who made it in his early 30s at another great successful company in the Valley seemed perfect and had perceived right answers. To the old investment banker listening, it sounded like a lot of stories he had heard in the past. But this was a different time and a different place. And the place was different, and his 45-year-old son was present. All of that, for some reason, made him nervous. They finished the meeting having absorbed the offer of a 25% interest in this still-to-be operational business, setting a valuation after a new investment of $200 million. The company had no sales or earnings. The management team members who had invested $9 million the past year wanted an additional $50 million investment. The investment banker knew his own firm would never invest, but he also knew some of America's wealthiest and most respected individuals and institutions had committed $40 million already. He also knew he would not be around to see how successful the company might become. He would be around, however, if it failed. He eventually committed some of his own money and about $5 million from a private company interested in the product on whose board he served. It felt like the culmination of something significant in his life, yet he did not know why. He left his son and family in California, then took the long airplane ride back to New York. He arrived at his apartment in a fashionable part of Manhattan, slumped in a chair, and tried to compose himself. He felt on the edge of a mountain looking down at an endlessly deepening hole. It was cold, and he was alone. Then the phone rang. It was his daughter checking that he'd arrived home safely, asking if he would like to have dinner with her family. He declined. The night seemed endless. He was unable to read or watch television and decided to get dressed and take a walk. It was 2:30 a.m. He walked to Central Park, entered at East 79th Street, and did not know where he was, or who he was, or anything except that he was surrounded by trees and completely lost in every way. He saw a bench and sat down, unable to come to terms with his situation. In California, the executives at the company were very pleased that only a few hours before they had completed a $50 million funding, all of it equity. They could not believe how fortunate they were. They could now hire the right engineers and attack the market in an aggressive fashion and think about some years hence a public offering of their shares at an even higher valuation and maybe even becoming the most successful company of the decade. The 42-year-old leader might become the new titan of Silicon Valley. The customers of the company would become followers of green companies, and the company would become recognized as an American champion of financial astuteness, as well as an environmental leader in a socially responsible business with good earnings. There was a lot of work yet to be done, but they had all the tools they needed. Meanwhile, in Central Park, the man who had helped move their dream toward reality still sat on a park bench as the sun began to rise in the east, casting long shadows and brightening the pavement, and unveiling the beauty of the numerous flowers and shrubs, and changing the black lawns into a bright green and beautiful yellow. He still could not figure out who he was or what he was doing in this park bench and where he belonged. 6 hours later, in the bright sunshine, a small group of adults and children looked at the man, their eyes now closed, his posture erect, but his life gone, like the darkness of the evening he had witnessed the night before.
And now Erin White reading Physician's Note, re Mrs. B. Erin?
Hi. Physician's note, RE Mrs. B. 32-year-old female presents with laceration to left forehead, extensive bruising of left orbital and temporal areas secondary to, quote, fall. Consent obtained for immediate repair of defect. Simple closure not possible. Tension would result in rippling and possible rupture. Subcutaneous tissue undermined, edges aligned, O to Y flap achieved with interrupted sutures. Patient advised, pronounced scar likely unless care prioritized. Reviewed instructions, risk of pain, infection, necrosis, isolation, paralysis, fracture. Patient claims understanding, continues refusal of treatment, excision strongly recommended for parasitic mass lodged in heart. Thank you.
Mary Richie will be reading an excerpt from The Conductor.
This is the opening of my story, The Conductor. What he said was, I want some time. How much time? An instant, a measure. Well, how much? You know, when someone says, I want some time, it means there is no limit, no limit. They don't say, I want all the time in the world, because they are taking it anyway. I want some time. That means he is taking his time back from you. You had added his time to your own, but now he's grabbed it back, snatched it back, and there's just a gash left. Oh, in time it will heal, like hell it will. I want some time. I see this dark, deep opening. I see a kind of painting, a landscape. You look into a valley and there are columns. There is a traveler wrapped in a cloak, but it was painted by a fellow in a studio who only dreamed of the Campagna. He wouldn't have liked it there. And he took his time, and it is darkening the sky he painted. And that is what I saw as he said that. And here, in this place in the hills, it is always raining dark thunderstorms. I want some time, he said. Of course, I answered. He smiled, so relieved. He had gotten away with it. He had pulled it off. He was watching me carefully and seeing that I was in control of myself. I stayed calm. I was controlling myself. So that meant, in his view, he was controlling me. So naturally, yes, he smiled. But I wasn't in control. I was in a dark valley, in a reproduction of an etching after a painting of an imagined dark ancient valley. And actually, outside we were in a dark valley. It was getting ready to thunderstorm. But I was behaving well, in control of myself. Is that the same thing as being in control? When I am happy, I feel out of control, and I feel I am floating. Out of control, or rather, control has nothing to do with anything important, is not what matters. I do not feel in control or out of control. A control. When I am out of contact with control, it is in my own experience because I'm with a man I fancy very much. And for some time, James has been that man. That's why I married him. And I have fancied him. I really have. And he did fancy me, or I would have seen the signs. I know. I'm not inexperienced. Self-deluding, but what was I to him? Why did I think I that way? A-I. The sound of pain. I was a pain to him. No, I was never a pain to him. I never reached him in that way, it appears. It is just that now I am in so much pain. And now someone else has reached him. This Isabel reached him in his innards. And for her, he wants time, needs time. And that time must come from my substance, can only come from my substance. But I do not understand this thing called time, and he does. I'm sure he does. He must. Being a conductor, he must think about it constantly. He has to. Asking for time, he knows the significance, what he's asking for, because music is time breathing, is time gnawing at itself, is time swelling up like that 4th of July thing kids get, black as a quarter note, as a rest bar. You lit it and it fizzed, it puffed up a python, and then it piddled grayish foam. It was ugly, I loved it. It was time scrunching itself like a kid, squealing satisfaction as a burning bar swells into blackish diarrhea. Is time staring at itself? Is time in love?
Sakurai Lazar reading an excerpt from The Courtship and Marriage of Meyer Lansky, 1928-29.
This is actually an excerpt from an excerpt. This is a chunk of a novel that I'm writing that has Meyer Lansky as one of the sort of figures in it. Meyer Lansky, in case you don't know, was a famous Jewish gangster back in the day. But he's frequently presented through the point of view of the women in his life. Now, there weren't many of them, but there were some of them. And this is an early one. She touched up her lipstick in the powder room mirror, a girl who'd sewn her own dress from a butterick pattern, a blue shift she wore with a brooch of fake pearls. Anne Citron, formerly Anna. The name change, a hopeful step away from the past, a step toward here, the Park Central Hotel. The beige light settled behind her on a grouping of cane chairs on a pale carpet. Her face in the mirror seemed too long, the curves Semitic. The longer she stood taking in the room's stillness, the more haughty and derisive it became. She left the nickel Meyer had given her in the attendance basket and went back into the dining room. At her place on the table was a small velvet box. The whole night so far had felt illicit, American, unfamiliar, not Jewish. Now he was giving her a ring, as in the movies. She looked at him and his eyes changed, and she looked back down, trying to smile, imagining the way it ought to appear. He prodded her to open the box. She didn't know whether to sit up or keep standing, so she sat clumsily back in the chair. The ring's small size surprised her. The smallness made it less dreamlike. It was a round crystal set in what she imagined at first was silver. Only gradually did she understand that it wasn't silver and it wasn't a crystal. He looked at her with his mouth parted, eyes mistrusting. She was worried now in a way that was almost superstitious. "Is it paste or is it real?" she asked. "That's a diamond," he said. "Meyer, that's a real diamond." There was something flummoxed about how he adjusted himself in his chair. "I shouldn't have surprised you like that," he said. He had reached across the table and taken back the box. He snapped it closed with a quiet movement of his index finger, then secreted away in the lower pocket of his jacket. "Does it mean what I think it means?" she asked. "That's a real diamond," he said. "You think about it for a couple of days, then you tell me what you think it means." On the table between them were stemmed glasses, white dishes, silverware arrayed on the white cloth, whiteness in high spaces full of air. He wished she would sit up straighter, not be so dour and scared. The waiter brought over 2 cut glass dishes filled with diced melon and pineapple. Fruit cocktails, they were called. It was prohibition, so there was no wine. I heard you drove all the way to Florida, she said later in the dark car, raising her chin in the back seat. They were in a garage on Cannon Street that he and Ben Siegel owned, among a fleet of other cars that he and Ben owned. I never drove to Florida, he said. Were there storks there, she asked. Who told you that? Not storks, pelicans, flamingos, she said. I never drove to Florida. I never drove anywhere near that far. He felt the neckline of her dress against his wrists, her face in his hands, the length and fineness of her hair. She was warm on top of the opened coat. He had worried at first that it would be strange that she was taller than he was, but instead there was a sense of abundance. He kissed her and moved his hands toward her breasts, and she pushed them away, over and over, as slow and repetitive as the waves on a lake. They sat at joined tables, the Lanskys and her family, the Citrons, her brother Jules in a silk tie and beige suit. Across from him, Meyer's mother staring absently through thick lenses. Waiters in vests brought blintzes, sour cream, whitefish, borscht. She watched the plates go by without appetite. She knew so many things now. How the garage on Cannon Street was more than just a garage. How Meyer and Ben owned property like that all over the city and in New Jersey and Philadelphia. How they imported whiskey from Scotland on ships they chartered themselves and then distributed across the United States to wealthy businessmen, even to politicians. Her friend Esta, Ben's girl, had told her this. Esta, the brassy one, her lips clenched in the moment before she burst forth with the secrets. What Ben had told her after their date at the French Baker's or Manny Wolf's restaurant, the movie or the pleasure drive in the Gardner Coupe or the Dodge Brothers sedan. She watched her father frown his way through 2 plates of food, a squat man in a scuffed hat. Meyer bowed his head and didn't speak, the lunch a duty to be gotten through. When it was over, he reached into his pants pocket and discreetly gave one of the waiters money without asking for a bill, placing his hand on the man's shoulder as he bent down. Everyone saw, had been waiting for it. Her father endured the moment with a scheming stare at the dish of cream that still remained on the table. She had never imagined her father capable of jealousy. As they were getting up to go, he took Meyer aside and they talked in the tiny space between the table and the bathroom, Meyer's topcoat draped over his arm, a young man with money, an old man giving him trite advice. He asked if I wanted a job, Meyer told her afterward. Out in Hoboken at the store. I said, of course, sure, I'd be honored. She turned, holding him in her squint. They were parked outside the tenements they'd both grown up in, bedding slung from the fire escapes. A thick crowd parted passively around the car with their bundles and sacks, none of them looking in the windows. Anne in her old butterick dress, Meyer in his coat and hat and gloves. I'll help him with the accounting, the books, he said, a couple days a week. He's your father. She looked down at the ring on her finger. For a startled moment, she'd pictured Meyer standing at the counter in an apron. Already she'd begun to imagine an apartment far uptown with high windows, carpets, chandeliers. Not just to imagine it, but to think of it as rightfully hers. I'll leave it at that.
Tracy M. King-Sanchez is now going to direct a section from her play.
I guess what you need to know beforehand is that this is about 2 young girls, aged 15 and 16. They live in a group home, and Miko has just returned home to the group home after spending a weekend at a potential family. And she has been stealing things while she was away for the weekend, collecting little gadgets and things from the potential family's house. So this is from the middle section of the play.
Hey, come on.
I take that, and I'm an accomplice.
What the hell are you talking about? Just take it.
I don't want any stolen junk, okay?
Nah, I got this for you. I mean, she asked me if I wanted something, so, you know, I thought I'd hook my girl up. Look, the receipt's in there. You know, in case you're not feeling it and you want to take it back or something. Come on, open it, Shanty. Come on.
If it's stolen, I swear I'll drag your butt to the nearest precinct.
Shanty. No, open it.
I'll open it in the morning. Right now I need to catch some Z's.
She said she wants to meet you.
Who?
The Elkie.
Why the hell she wants to meet me for?
I don't know. She was like all 411 asking me about school and living in a group home and about Miss Millie and you guys. I mean, all up in my business.
Your business, not mine. She don't need to know about me. So what you tell her?
I don't know. I just told her how it's crazy up in here sometimes, like all the nut jobs that be coming in and out of here. And like how you and me are the only ones who ain't all messed up in the head. Then she started getting all Dr. Phil on me, telling me it was okay to be mad and stuff. But that I shouldn't stay mad because it's only going to make people I don't know slam doors in my face. I mean, like, for real. What else they going to do? Somebody just show up at their house and they don't even know them? Shit, mad. Just don't open the damn door. Anyway, she just kept yapping about this mad thing. And that's when I told her, you think I'm mad, you should see my girl Shanty. And then I told her about that time you picked up the toaster and threw it at Manny, but how it missed it hit Miss Millie in the back of the head.
Why do you tell that lady that for?
Yo, that was type funny though, because Manny was mad high, and after that, he kept calling you Pop-Tart until you cracked his teeth with your cell phone.
So you sat around all weekend making fun of us, acting like your shit don't stink?
It wasn't even like that.
Oh, so you told her about how you got caught behind the school dumpster last year, giving head to the UPS guy.
Fuck you, bitch.
I'm sure I'd have to take a number.
What, you calling me a hoe?
Quack, quack.
You know what? Give me back my shit. I try to be all nice to you. That's why you ain't got no friends.
Oh, like all the friends you think you got? The ones who be talking behind your back, running off at the mouth about who you gave it up to?
Whatever. You just making that up. Always acting like you know everything. Nobody be talking about me.
Everybody talks about you, Miko.
No, they don't. I'm like cool with everybody at that school. I got like 500 friends on my Facebook. How many you got, huh? 2? Maybe that's why she ain't pick you to come stay with her. Nobody wants you around.
I could have killed you.
Yeah, right.
I could have just snapped your neck in two.
You're such a freaking drama queen. Here, open it. It kind of smells a little funky.
You sure you didn't steal this?
Nah, I told you. The receipt's in the bag.
Are you fucking crazy?
Andrew Botsford will be reading from his memoir, Echoes.
Some 17 years after my father's death, the continuous applications of drugs and alcohol had accelerated the erosion of an already somewhat unstable mind and spirit to the point where the center could no longer hold. On a trip up the Intracoastal Waterway on the Shady Lady, the sport fishing vessel I was running for charters, I determined that I needed to stop ingesting all substances all at once, and the last remaining cement of sanity started to crack and dissolve under the strain of withdrawal. I walked off my boat in Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, in search of some kind of reference point for my disintegrating identity, and through a fairly random sequence of events, found myself in jail in Wilmington. As a Yankee, I was unable to communicate with the bail bondsman, a true son of the South. And by the time of my arraignment, the DTs had taken hold and I had come completely unglued. Confined to a solitary cinder block holding cell with a steel door, I became a more and more unmanageable inmate, refusing to eat, tearing up the mattress they threw on the floor, howling, spouting bits of Shakespeare soliloquies I could remember about the quality of mercy and suffering slings and arrows, cobbled together with compelling lines from the existential BBC television drama, The Prisoner. Probably fearing some type of liability, the city fathers of Wilmington transferred me to a primitive incarceration unit for the criminally insane in Raleigh Central Prison. Under a protocol referred to as strict suicide, I was put in a turn-of-the-century style cell with bars for a front wall, a steel sink, a steel toilet, and a steel bench from which they had removed all bedding. They also stripped me naked, perhaps anticipating that I would find a way to kill myself using my prison-issued jumpsuit. When my demands for better living conditions were drowned out by the schizophrenic clamor emanating from the cells on either side of mine, I devised a way to flood my cell to get some attention. The guard's response was simply to turn off the water to my sink. I sometimes wonder today what they must have thought when they looked in the cell and saw the naked psycho standing on his head in the seatless toilet, arms wrapped around the outside of the steel bowl and head in the water. I guess they thought I was trying to drown myself, because after they intervened, they seemed disbelieving of my honest explanation that I was an aquatic mammal and was only trying to wet down the top of my head to maintain proper hydration. Eventually, the prison staff rendered me more docile through the application of time-honored behavior modification techniques that included negative reinforcement with wooden batons and over-medication with powerful antipsychotic drugs. My family put the legal machinery in motion to allow me to cop a plea, absolve the state of any responsibility for my condition, and be released based on time served, a little over a month, though it seemed a lot longer. I returned to Long Island, and in the absence of the antipsychotics, it soon became evident to all around me that I was still unhinged and likely a danger to myself and possibly others. While friends and family worked to convince me that I should voluntarily put myself right back behind locked doors in a psych ward, all I could think of was that I needed to be at the beach.
Maggie Bloomfield will be reading her poem, Miss Alabaster.
Miss Alabaster. Miss Alabaster had a great terror of flying. Knees and elbows cracked in flight, and dresses blew over her head. Planes and birds shrieked gleefully at the surface cracks and the geese's quacks. In the stratosphere, there is little to say and less to do. Nothing to eat. She swallowed cirrus, spat out cumulus, blew past the sun in the ocean of her eyes, and laughed at God and the baggage handlers. White remains her favorite color. Pearl, teal, ivory, scarlet. She is quite the world traveler, if there were some place to go.
Christopher Cascio will be reading from The Good One.
To those of you who were here on Sunday, when I read a section of the story, I offer half an apology. Because this is going to be a different section, I also offer 1/4 of a "you're welcome." The final fourth to be delivered to your door discreetly in a plain manila envelope upon your completion of the story's final third. This is the opening from The Good One. When Father was 17, Grandfather had tried to strangle him with his own hair. Why? He'd refused to have it cut. Grandfather beat all of his children, and on occasion his wife. Mother explained it to me. She said those were just the times. Grandfather didn't seem to remember. He would see child victims on television and say things like, "We never had any of those sorts of problems in our house." Once, when I was young, Mother slapped me on the mouth for swearing. It set me straight. Father never hit me, or my brother Francis, as far as I remember, even had Francis given him good reason, and I'd be willing to bet he did on at least several occasions. I don't think he ever could have raised a hand to us. Waiting for them to arrive that morning, it strained me to imagine Grandfather's transformation. He was nearing 83. At the sound of pressed gravel and a soft-listed stop, we all crowded the front door window to watch as Father came around from the driver's side, unfolded the walker and set it down, opened the passenger side door, and helped Grandfather to his feet. Grandfather's moccasins eased slowly into the dirt. His small gray hand took hold of the walker. His pant legs shook as he stood. Mother folded her arms tightly inside, then unlocked the door so she could hold it open once they had made it onto the porch. "Jesus Christ, he looks thin," I whispered. Francis was silent. Mother said, "It's been 4 months since he went in. A fall had started it, then fistula, then an infection from prolonged catheterization, all compounded by type 2 diabetes." She opened the door. "Go help him." I hustled out, bracing against the cold. All in all, he didn't look that bad. Sure, he was frail, but he looked healthy, alert. His eyes were clear and lucid, and he smiled when he saw me. He always had a look about him, half mad but dashing. Something in the deep recesses of his orbitals combined with large, round eyeballs set in sharp relief against Mediterranean skin, the type of physical charisma that improves with age. I laid a hand on his back and walked alongside him. He was criminally photogenic. Inside, he sat on a wooden chair. Francis and I sat on the couch. Father went to the kitchen for a much-needed drink, and Mother stood looking Grandfather up and down. "So how do you feel, Jimmy?" she asked. He shrugged and asked how he was supposed to feel. She shook her head as if concluding he was indeed his old self, and then joined Father in the kitchen. I followed her and asked if there were any other things I needed to get from the car. She said no. I returned to the living room and stared at him. He stared back and scratched the top of his head, stretching his face and raising his brow, giving his best Stan Laurel. "So how does this work?" I asked, "with the tubes and the bags, without those rolling stands, you know?" He grabbed his left pant leg at the knee and pulled it up, revealing a bag strapped to his calf. He shook his leg and said this was his bladder tube. Then he lifted his shirt and showed his colostomy. Grandfather had lived with us for nearly 10 years, but his homecoming had still produced the anxiety of having company. We made passes between the kitchen and the living room as if we were automatons affixed to the wooden tracks of a giant cuckoo clock. Part of me prayed for derailment. The bathroom was immaculate and the cats were caged, the front porch cleared of loose trash. The aide wasn't due to visit for another 3 days. After an hour or so, we began to settle down. Francis vanished back into his subterranean hovel in the cellar, and Mother sat at the computer table at the far end of the living room, enthralled by the Russians' preference for close-range combat. On her day off from the one-stop, she watched nothing but programs on Hitler and Stalin. Something about the objective documentation of crimes against humanity attracted her like catnip. Her eyes sparkled when the narrator declared that after the hand grenade and the pistol, the Russians' weapon of choice was the sharpened edge of a spade. A flurry across the kitchen tile inspired a swift curse from Father. One of the dogs had gotten out. Grandfather jerked his head and glared, then returned back to the refuge of the television. Mother was unaffected. I sat at my table by the corner window, using a vegetable peeler to fashion Thomas Jefferson's head out of a bar of almond biscotti-scented soap. I was nearing completion of the prototypes for my line of nut-scented decorative presidential soaps. Peanut dozed at my feet like a furry mollusk. Because it was Angel who was gone, I didn't worry. She was the smart one, like a person on 4 powerful legs, capable of chasing down deer in clear pastures. She was compact and pointed. Peanut, on the other hand, well, she was special. It's always like that. Not that I'm claiming any sort of Lokian deity sets out to meddle when you get a second dog, but it just seems to work out that way. If the first one is clever, the next will be the type that, if you sock its foot, believes itself anchored eternally to that precise location on the floor. If one is a dunce, then the other can use an abacus to solve matters of addition and subtraction. If one uses the toilet, then the other drinks from it immediately afterward. When Peanut got out, she would prance in a 7-foot circle in the front yard with her tongue drooping gormlessly from the front of her mouth. When Angel got out, she ran. After an early supper, Father caught Grandfather sneaking butter. He walked in and spotted Grandfather with a gob on his finger and the tub still open on the counter. Father yelled that if he kept doing this, he was going to start getting shots again. Father grabbed the butter, wiped Grandfather's finger with a rag, and then put his own index finger directly in front of Grandfather's face. He said he would inject him right through the tip of the nose. Thank you.
Last night we had a wonderful poetry reading with Julie Sheehan, who is the poetry editor of the Southampton Review, and with Harvey Shapiro. And in this issue, we're very lucky that Kathryn Levy conducted an interview with Harvey Shapiro, and now she's going to be reading her poem, Absolute Truth.
For many years, I ran a Poets in the Schools program in New York City, which Kaylie once worked in, and I taught in it myself. I used to do a little exercise for my 4th and 5th graders called the Absolute Truth. I would tell them that as poets, we always need to tell the absolute truth. And the truth about me is that I was born in the basement of a school and raised by a witch. And I go to Venus every morning for a cup of great big green coffee. They loved this, and they went on to write incredibly revealing absolute truth poems themselves. It took me 2 decades after creating the exercise to get around to writing my own absolute truth poem, but here it is. The Absolute Truth. I was raised in a school, in the basement of a school. My mother was a witch who fed me chalk for breakfast. She made me learn to love it. Or I knew nothing else, so I came to hate eating. I have a home on Venus. I am fond of the heat. All my lovers are tall, 6'3". They bend down when they kiss me, or they lift me up. I'm as light as a no one. We have no seasons, but I always need change, so I dream new lovers. I travel to the earth. I am heading to see the final glaciers before they melt, or the sea turtles on the last island they can breed. I've lived 200 years, but I've found the new ointments. My skin is glowing, my body still supple. Last night, one of the lovers crawled into my bed. I need to dig deeper. He thinks I don't love him, and he's right. I dwell in an egg in my home on Venus, and all that world outside, it is chalk.
Vienna Bernard is going to read from her novel, Keeping Secrets.
Poland, January 1945. His breath formed puffy clouds in front of him. The only sound he heard was made by his shoes as he walked over the crisp snow. If he had not been warmed by the anticipation of seeing Anna, the freezing cold, typical of Polish winters, would have made him shiver. As he saw the iron gate off in the distance, he smiled and quickened his pace. His heart beat so fast, he felt it was about to explode out of his chest. The young nun who greeted him as she opened the heavy iron gate made no eye contact but seemed cordial. She led him towards the office of the Mother Superior. He smiled as he remembered the sound he and Anna made, walking these same glistening hardwood floors years before. Inside the office, his smile disappeared when the face he expected to see was not there. Instead, a much younger woman with a stern expression sat behind the desk. She asked him to take a seat. His feet were leaden. He could not move. "I'm here to see the Mother Superior," he said, expecting to be ushered into the proper room. I am the Mother Superior. What can I do for you, she said, and smiled for the first time. Reluctantly, he took the seat offered in front of her desk and blurted out, I've come to get Anna back. I had brought her to the orphanage temporarily until someone in her family was able to care for her. He was there to reclaim his daughter, but he could not say that. It was still not safe. The family is very grateful to the sisters for taking the child in, but her aunt is now in a position to raise her. After he finished, he exhaled in relief. Even with this new nun in charge, he did not expect any problems. They had to give her back. Then he heard, I'm sorry, Dr. Bielinski, Anna is not here. There are no children here, and they have not been for some years. As she talked, he could see her mouth move, but his words echoed far off in the distance. He stared blankly for some time before he could say anything. Where is Anna, he said, almost in a whisper. I'm afraid I cannot answer that, she said, a beatific smile on her face. He shook his head in disbelief. How can that be? The children were moved long before I got here. The orphanage records were destroyed by a fire. I would not know where to begin my search, she said. All during the war, he was cheered because he knew where she was, safe in the convent. With the war over, he expected the sisters would understand the child was better off with her family. But his Anna was lost, and now so was he. His wit were enough to outwit the Nazis, but if the nuns did not know where Anna is, how could he find her? His whole body shook. He gripped the arms of the chair to steady himself. It was supposed to be easy. What do I tell the family, he said. The nun shook her head. I'm sure Anna was placed in a good home. By now, she has a new family that loves her, she said politely, before ushering him out. Outside, in the bitter cold, a howling wind blew the mounds of snow around, mimicking a snowstorm. As the heavy gate shut behind him, he leaned against it for support. The tears streaming down his face quickly turned to ice. He wanted to lie down in the snow and sleep forever. Florida, May 1976. Harry Stone awoke from his nap, shivering. In his dream, once again, he'd been trudging through the snow, weathering the numbing cold of the Polish winter. Unable to focus in the harsh light, his eyes panned furtively around the large, sun-drenched bedroom. To Harry, the suffused brightness mimicked the glare of the sun on the glistening snow, and for a brief moment, the nightmare continued. Then he heard his wife's familiar voice. Good, you're awake, Manya said, and continued making her final preparations for closing down their Florida condo for the season. The driver will be here in about an hour. Harry nodded and sat up slowly. He said nothing. Resting at the side of the bed, he took his pulse. Not bad, he thought. Heartbeat is weak but steady. He was relieved his dream had not brought on another fibrillation episode. As he stood up, he caught his reflection in the mirror and stared into his own eyes, seeing a stranger. Manya was humming a jingle she'd heard on the radio as she methodically worked her way down her checklist. Only she could make things right. Friday closings at Weekend Magazine, where Hannah Stone toiled as a writer, were notoriously chaotic, but she usually managed to keep her anxiety level mid-meter. This Friday was different. Uncharacteristically, Hannah was overwhelmed. Her story wasn't going well. Her parents were about to resurface, and Robert, her Robert, was far away. All morning she sat, eyes closed as if in prayer, her fingers poised on the home keys, hoping to conjure up an acceptable opening paragraph for her Rosalind Carter profile she was writing, all the while awaiting the call from her mother to announce her parents' safe arrival at LaGuardia Airport. Their impending return made Hannah's body stiffen, and she mentally reached for her bottle of Malax. Hannah loved her parents, but their unspoken demands almost cut off her air supply. When her parents were in New York, Hannah couldn't escape her overwhelming sense of responsibility for their happiness. She attributed the pain she saw etched on both their faces to her missteps. Hannah assumed guilt the way a sponge soaked up water.
And Hegde is going to read from a story, Haunting Wish.
Thank you, Susan and Luann, for inviting me. After I accepted this invitation, I was wondering, what am I doing? I'm putting myself in front of an unfamiliar crowd. So, but when I came in today, the academic campus put me at ease, and all the people I saw looked like nice people. So I'm thoroughly enjoying this experience. So, Haunting Wish has a couple of firsts. This is the first ever story that I wrote in English, and this is the first one to be published in a print journal. So I'm thankful to TSR people for accepting the story. I'm going to read the opening of the story, Haunting Wish. Hema had never been more firm in her resolve to see Mr. Shastri about her husband's spirit than in the moment she slipped. "Ay-ay-yo," she screamed as her left hand shot upwards. Flailing, trying not to tumble backwards, she gripped the handle of her bamboo basket, determined to keep the flowers for Ganesha from falling in the mud. She swung and swayed, but steadied herself. She should have known not to step on the dark green patches. Darn moss! It always grew on the path in the monsoon season. Yet, looking at the long trail made by her left foot, she smiled. Maybe she would have been a good acrobat, she thought. But who ever heard of a Brahmin acrobat? She dismissed the idea as silly and tried to undo the strands of her tangled thoughts. Almighty Ganesha, you saved me today. There was no way I could go to Mr. Shastri's with a big patch of mud on my behind. But should she still go to Mr. Shastri's today? What if the near fall was a bad omen? It was a bad omen if one's left foot tripped. Everyone knew that. The memory of her wedding ceremony roused an old twisting pain. While she was following Lakshman, her groom, around the sacred fire 7 times, her left foot had caught on the edge of her sari. She had shuddered, but quickly recovered and hoped that nobody had noticed. Later, after the ceremony, she fervently prayed to every god to protect her husband. Today she had slipped and not tripped, hadn't actually fallen, and the flowers in the basket had stayed put. So, perhaps it was a good sign. Still, it wouldn't hurt to pray a little harder to Ganesha. She said a long and silent Om, followed by almost 100 of the Lord's 1,000 names. Ganapati, Gajanana, Ekadanta, Vignaraja, Lambodhara. She took a deep breath and smelled wet earth and strong scent of jasmine flowers from her basket. The damp air swirled on her skin and perked her up as she continued on her way to the temple. On either side of the path, wild grass stood wet with rain. Tall trees skirted the grassland in the distance, and rivulets of water cascaded from higher ground. When a puddle obstructed her path, Hema lifted the hem of her sari ever so slightly, just enough to protect the garment as well as her modesty. It wouldn't do to show her bare skin lest a wandering eye see too much leg. Who knew? Laborers might be passing by. As her mother-in-law never ceased to remind her, Hema was at an age to elicit feeling other than religious, even on the path to the temple. Her face had the sharp features and the fair color of her high caste. Her big black eyes and long slim nose could make anyone stop for a second look. Even the daily diet of dishes cooked in coconut oil hadn't swelled her narrow waist. She wore a simple gray sari with a plain blouse for concealment rather than show. Still, when she walked with her unhurried steps, her hips swayed in rhythm. Hema would have loved to skip and hop like a girl because she had escaped the clutches of her mother-in-law for the good part of the day, but her spine still tingled from an earlier slip, and the worry about her plans made her steps cautious. Would Mr. Shastri help her? Would he scoff at her request? This morning, after getting up from bed, she had gone to the bathroom, a bathhouse that stood semi-detached from the main house and contained a well, a stack of wood, and a big boiler. She had started a fire to boil water for bathing, blowing with a little metal cylinder on the cinders until her eyes hurt from the smoke coming out of the stubborn, sodden wood. As the flames finally caught, once again she felt Lakshman's presence, but he was there and not there, only a receding image of his eyes dimmed with disappointment. She had decided it was time to do something to get his spirit close to her. After starting the fire, Hema rushed to the kitchen and made breakfast of rice pancakes and cooked rice with okra curry for lunch before talking to her mother-in-law. who bought the Hema's ruse of going to the Ganesha temple. It wasn't exactly a lie, because the temple was on the way anyhow. She couldn't incur the wrath of Ganesha by telling an outright lie. Halfway to the temple, she spotted a patch of durve, tiny three-bladed grass that was the Lord's favorite. She plucked a bunch and put it in her basket. She entered the huge ancient temple in a cheerful mood. The pujari, the Hindu priest, seemed to have finished the worship ritual and gone home. Hema was happy the temple was deserted, and there was no one to tell her mother-in-law how long she spent there. She hurried through her prayers and offered the contents of her basket. Was she imagining it, or had the eyes of the massive statue looked kindly at her? Now she could go to Mr. Shastri's with a clear conscience. When she emerged from the temple, as if in answer to her prayers, the sun had broken through the heavy clouds in the middle of the rainy season. Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful, wonderful reading, and I hope to see many of you tonight. Goodbye. Thank you.